We all know what happened when Tal played lower rated players or it was in some simultaneous exhibition. He would sack all of his pieces and deliver an easy mate. But what about when he was playing the absolute best players in the world? Well, in today's game, he's playing against a player named Ulf Andersson, and the year is 1976. Now, at this point in time, Ulf Andersson may very well have been the greatest defensive chess player in the world. Of course, you could make a strong argument for Karpov, who was the world champion at that time, but certainly Andersson was very much in that league, even if not a little bit better when it came to pure defensive chess. Very hard to generate active attacking play against Andersson. Well, let's see how Tal managed to handle it in 1976 in Stockholm. Tal has white, Andersson has black. Let us jump right in. E4 and then C5 from Andersson, the Sicilian defense. Knight F3, D6, D4, the open Sicilian, and after knight F6, knight C3, Andersson plays E6, or the Scheveningen variation of the Sicilian. The absolute main line here seems to be the Keres attack, where white just launches the G-pawn to dislocate the knight at F6. But here Tal plays bishop to E2. Now, that may look like a passive move for such a strong attacking player, but it is not that passive, actually. The idea is that this bishop is going to support a white's pawn advance on the king side. So it doesn't look like it's aggressively posted, but actually it has a lot of aggressive intentions at this E2 square. Bishop to E7 from black, castles, castles, and F4. And we see white gaining space in the center. Usually what white wants to do is either play F5 here or E5 here, depending on the circumstances. And of course that results in different types of positions, but they're both attacking ideas on the king side. Knight to C6, Andersson puts pressure on Tal's knight at D4, bishop E3 to defend that knight, A6, the idea being to later expand on the queen side with B5. Obviously, at the moment, it would undermine his knight at C6, but that's the idea later. And now queen to E1. This little move, this little pinky move of the queen to E1 indicates very bad intentions from white. He wants to shift this queen over to the king side and use it to directly attack black's king. So this little move to E1 is a very aggressive move from Tal. Knight takes D4, getting that knight off so he can play B5. Bishop takes D4 and B5. So black's main target in these lines is usually the E4 pawn and square. So in this position, he's preparing bishop to B7 to attack E4 along with the knight, and then the pawn at B5 can play to B4 and dislodge the pawn's defender, the knight at C3. So Andersson wants to put as much pressure on E4 as possible here. Tal plays rook to D1, placing his rook opposite black's queen, and also it could land on the D3 square, and there's a little rook lift potential here for attacking the king. Bishop to B7, continuing the plan of putting pressure on E4. Bishop to F3 defends the pawn. Now, it actually defends it at 2 times because the bishop goes to F3 and defends, and allows the queen also to defend. Queen to C7 helps black keep some control over the E5 square and also puts pressure down the C file, attacking a C pawn that is currently undefended if the knight were to get dislodged. So Tal goes right in. He goes E5. It plays an aggressive move, prepared to exchange off these light-squared bishops in order to gain space in the center of the board. DE5, FB5, and knight to D7. Now, this pawn at E5 is very double-edged. It clearly has a lot of attacking potential. It has space on the king side, puts pressure on this F6 square here. But it's also quite vulnerable. And it blocks the dark-squared bishop of white's position. So there's some risk on both sides here. The light-squared bishops come off after Tal exchanges them, but now the queen is in control of a nice diagonal here. And what about this bishop? Is it good? Is it bad? We shall see. Knight to E4. Shifting this knight into attacking mode. Potentially, it could land on F6, even be sacrificed on that square, just to open up all of these dark squares around black's king. It could really cause some trouble for Andersson. Rook A to D8, just putting the rook on the only open file, and some indirect pressure on the bishop. And now rook to D3 from Tal. That classic rook lift we were talking about, it can go to G3, can go to H3, and put some real pressure on black's king. Queen to C6. This directly attacks the C2 pawn, but I don't think Andersson's main goal was the pawn in and of itself. The main goal is to get this queen active inside this position, and it can be used as a defensive weapon, even being able to come back and defend on the king side. So it's not just about the pawn, it's also about activating that queen. Tal plays rook to g3, pinning the g7 pawn, aiming that rook at the king. Now, computers actually see this as equal, but I have to ask, who would ever want to play black in a position like this against Mikhail Tal? I mean, you have to be crazy. This is his wheelhouse. This is exactly the way he wants to play chess. He's gotten the kind of attacking position against Andersson most people were not able to get. So Tal can be happy with the outcome, even though computers say this is equal, but in the real human world, I don't think that it is. Queen takes c2, so black is now up a pawn, but white has a very strong attack. Queen to e3 from white. Obviously, what Tal wants to do is play queen to h6. Because of the pin on the g-pawn, it couldn't take the queen. In fact, he would be threatening mate on g7. That would force g6, and then this f6 square would become very, very weak. So what Andersson does is play queen to c4. So if the queen were to go to h6, he could take the bishop with check, which means he would have time not only to grab the piece, but to defend, because he would be doing that with check. Tal kicks that queen away, but the queen goes to d5, staying in contact with this bishop on d4, so the queen to h6 move cannot be played. But in this position, obviously, he's also attacking e5 twice with the knight and the queen. In this position, Tal jumps in. Knight to f6 check. And this is quite forcing. Obviously, the pawn can't take the knight because of this pin. But notice that the knight is forking the king and the queen. That means it has to be captured. You can't just play king to h8 or anything like that. You have to take the knight, otherwise you would lose the queen. If he were to take the knight with his knight, that would be a blunder, because then after pawn takes knight, queen d4, Tal would ignore the queen and just play pawn takes bishop, and then this pawn at e7 forks the two rooks, and the queen is defended by the rook at g3. So this would, of course, be a completely winning position because of this fork by the pawn. So black basically has to take with the bishop. There's no other alternative. Bishop takes f6, ef6, and now obviously threatening rook takes g7, check. The knight can't take because the bishop would then take the knight, and the pin would keep the black from recapturing the bishop. Basically, g6 is forced. So now this is very dangerous, obviously. And in a perfect world, what white would like to do is just play queen h6, queen g7 mate. Simple as that. But black has a lot of defensive resources, surprising defensive resources that Tal has to work through here as he goes forward. If queen to h6, then just queen takes d4 with check, and after king h1, knight takes f6, and black would just be winning, just be up a piece. So what Tal does, he plays rook to g4, right? That defends the bishop. So now after queen to h6, there's no queen takes d4 check. So he's threatening queen h6 now by defending the bishop on d4. So Andersson plays king to h8, so that he can shift his rook to g8 to cover this g7 square to prevent mate on that square. If Tal plays queen to h6 now, and rook to g8, black can defend. He could play knight to f8 and hold things together. Now, in this position, it looks like white has a tactic. If you study mating patterns, you might see a tactic here, but it doesn't quite work. The move is queen to h7 check. Looks like it works because after king takes queen, rook to h4 looks like mate, but it isn't. He could interpose his queen, and now he would actually win the game, because he would have, after rook takes queen, he would be up an entire rook. So that means there's a further layer that Tal has to work through. So he plays bishop to b6, harassing this rook on d8. If knight takes the bishop, queen to h6, rook to g8, and now instead of playing this queen to h7 check sacrifice, you just play rook to h4. And that would basically force queen to h5. And after rook takes queen takes pawn, yeah, the material is close, but there's no way. This queen is just going to be a marauder over the entire board. This king is vulnerable. So this would be a terrible position, a losing position for black. So what Andersson does instead is just play rook to c8 to get his rook away from that attack. But now queen to h6 is played by Tal, threatening, of course, queen to g7, checkmate. Now rook to g8. Black is threatening to just play knight to f8, and if the knight lands on f8, that means he has h7 and g7 covered, and he may even be better. Basically, Tal has only one move to win the game. Everything else actually gives Black an edge, believe it or not. And this position, the move he plays is rook to d4. A very strong move. Basically, it creates two threats. When the queen moves, it's threatening the knight, and it's threatening that same mating pattern we saw earlier. So let's say he plays queen to c6, right, to keep the knight defended, but then queen to h7 check works. Because after king h7, rook to h4 is checkmate, because there's no queen to interfere. So this is actually would be a checkmate. So he can't play queen to c6 after rook to d4. So what he does, because he can't defend against both threats, is he takes the bishop to get a rook and minor piece in exchange for the queen. Rook takes d5, knight takes d5. But now rook to f3, again with that very same threat of queen takes h7 and rook to h3 would be mate. But Andersson plays rook to c3, a very strong move, preventing that threat and forcing the rooks, essentially forcing the rooks off of the board. Here's the problem. Even though material is equal, it's a queen for a rook, a knight, and a pawn, the queen loves these kind of positions. And Tal is going to be able to create double and even triple attacks all over the board with his queen. Watch how he does this. First of all, queen to e3 attacks the knight. b4 defends the knight. Queen to a7, we have a double attack. An attack on the a6 pawn and the f7 pawn. Rook to f8 defends the pawn, but he doesn't grab the a6 pawn. Instead, he plays queen to c5 with another double attack, hitting the rook at f8 and the pawn at b4, which is a more important pawn. Rook to b8 defends the pawn, but now queen to d6, and this rook is overloaded. He's attacking the rook, and the rook can't defend the pawn and protect the back rank at the same time. It has to make a concession, and obviously he's not going to give up the back rank because that would be mate. So rook to c8, but then queen takes b4. Tal gets a pawn, and now this knight is not defended. Knight to d5, and then queen to b7. A triple attack. The pawn at a6, the rook at c8, the pawn at f7. And in this position, Andersson resigned. A great attack against one of the greatest defenders that ever lived, from Mikhail Tal. I hope you've enjoyed the game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.